and welcome to Books from Your Therapist, a podcast where we talk to therapists and mental health practitioners about their mental health related book recommendations. By mixing book talk with mental health, we hope to open up the conversation around books your therapist may have suggested and make them more accessible.
This podcast is not a substitute for mental health care. It's for educational and entertainment purposes only. I'm Amanda Throckmorton, a marriage and family therapist in California.
And I'm Tara Kremen, and I work in the book industry in Toronto, in Canada. In this episode, it's just Amanda and I today, and we're discussing some books that we have read recently and in the past and revisited. We're going to be discussing Burnout by Emily Nagoski and Amelia Nagoski, and also My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh.
Burnout. You, like most people, have probably experienced it. What's expected of women and what it's really like to exist as a woman in today's world are two different things, and we exhaust ourselves trying to close the gap. Sisters Emily and Amelia Nagoski are here to help end the all too familiar cycle of feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. In Burnout, they compassionately explain the obstacles and societal pressures we face and how we can fight back.
Our second book, My Year of Rest and Relaxation, shows us how sometimes alienation can even be necessary. It's a novel about a young woman's efforts to duck the ills of the world by embarking on an extended hibernation with the help of one of the world's worst psychiatrists, especially any psychiatrist in the annals of literature, and the battery of medicines that she prescribes. It is both tender and blackly funny, merciless and compassionate, and a book that stays with you for sure. We had a really good conversation chatting about burnout, which I think is something that is sadly too familiar to many people. So it was really nice to be able to discuss these two books and see how they play together.
Our first book is Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. As we just sort of stated, burnout is a huge topic. So why did you choose this book?
I picked it for very selfish reasons because it was something that I wanted to read as I'm not really feeling burnt out right now, thank God, touch wood. But toward the end of last year, I definitely had I just felt burnt. Like that phrase really was on my mind with the only way to kind of describe how I was feeling. And we had read Emily's book previously for a podcast episode, so I was aware of this book, and I think you had recommended it, and I still hadn't got around to reading it. But then I had seen it in a bookstore again, and it had all triggered that, like, oh yeah, I should finally get around to that book. That while I'm feeling not too burnt out right now, I wanted to sort of learn how to take some preventative actions or not dive into it. You know, it's always good to know ahead of time.
Totally. So something that's interesting, I don't think I've shared this with you, is that when this book came out, I think it was maybe 2016, 2017, around there, these social clubs have popped up in different cities called The Wing. Have you ever heard of this? It was like they were clubs in big cities for like working women. I don't know if they have continued post-pandemic lockdown, but I actually got a copy of this and saw Amelia Nagoski speak about the book with some girlfriends of mine. And it was really awesome to kind of hear why they decided to write this book. And, it's two sisters that wrote this together, and they both have very different careers, but both contributed a great deal to this book. So I was excited that you chose it so I could reread it.
That's so cool. And then you can tell me that you've never experienced burnout since that moment.
Exactly. Exactly. As we were saying, burnout is, a huge topic and maybe a bit of a buzzword as well. How is burnout defined in the book?
I think they sort of define them around three elements of burnout, which can be emotional exhaustion, which is the fatigue that comes from caring too much for too long. And then there's a second state of depersonalization, which is the depletion of empathy or caring and compassion. And then also a decreased sense of accomplishment. So I guess there's each of these three elements sort of lead towards people feeling a little bit burnt out, which I definitely resonated with. Always something about seeing words explaining how you're feeling, I think always makes me feel a little less alien in these states. And so it's always helpful to see it broken down.
Yeah, naming it makes it real, right?
No, for sure. And I didn't know anything about like what a lot of the book is about is the stress response cycle. And that seemed to be it's like a crucial piece to preventing burnout. So can you talk us through this from your kind of expert lens?
Sure. So this was my biggest takeaway from the book when I read it in 2016, 2017 era. And it's something I think about a lot personally and also talk about with clients that are experiencing fatigue or moving towards burnout. And like essentially, the stress response cycle is the biological process where the body experiences a stressor, has a physical and emotional response, and then needs to return to a state of calm. So, completing this cycle involves actively engaging in activities that help the body release stress and return to calm. So things like physical activity, creativity, or connection. I love this because it's a really helpful way to understand. Like a real life example would be someone that has a really stressful job and, maybe they work long hours and then they immediately come home and just zone out watching TV, which would be more sort of like a passive rest approach to decompressing. But what this is saying is that no, we actually have to move that energy in our body so we're not sort of stuck in chronic stress. So maybe that's when you do your workout after work. So you're actually like physically releasing some of those emotions and stress, and then you can kind of transition to the next part of your evening.
It seemed very familiar to some of the stuff that we talked about a little bit about, like the vagus nerve. Is vagus nerve? I can never pronounce that correctly.
Hmm.
Is that sort of what you're trying to influence in the stress response cycle? Like, is it similar to the freeze, panic, stop, like things? I know we chat about it in like one of our earlier episodes, and I feel like I'm learning a lot with this podcast. But the stress response cycle seemed to be a similar sort of idea.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, looking at the nervous system. And when we get stuck in chronic stress, we are in one of those more hypervigilant states. So maybe that looks like, yeah, just the irritability, super stressed, right? Yeah. So exactly. So it does tie exactly back into like the vagus nerve of how do we kind of return to that calmer state. I think there was the ladder that we talked about in the vagus nerve. So if you're up here, energy wise, what can you do to sort of calm your body, calm your mind to be able to bring your energy back down to like a state of calm?
It made sense to me, and because burnout as a word, it makes it feel like more long term, like it's something that's ongoing. It hasn't just happened. And I guess when I was thinking about it in terms of the nervous system, I guess you're in this state for so long that that has become the normal base state, but you're always trying to go below that piece. And I didn't, yeah, it totally makes sense to have like an actual thing to end the stress response cycle.
Totally. Yeah. If you're stuck in one of those states that's not more of your calm baseline, it starts to wear on you like that. You're in chronic stress. So it's just building and you're not able to kind of come back to a state of calm.
And how does the book Burnout define the difference between stress and stressors? And why is that distinction important?
Yeah. So stressors are the external causes that are happening around you, like deadlines, arguments, running late, sitting in traffic, things like that. And then stress is your body's internal response. What this book is talking about is you can remove the stressor and still feel stressed. Managing the stress response is crucial, even when the external issue is resolved, right? So maybe you're stuck in chronic stress and the deadline that you have is moved to a later date that feels manageable, but your body is still in that sort of extreme stress state. It like that's essentially what this book is talking about. Just moving the stressors doesn't eliminate your body's response to it.
Yeah, it's like that phrase, like everywhere you go, there you are. Like that
Hmm.
yeah, you don't, removing the stressors is not. identifying the things that are causing you stress.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I got a lot out of this book, but I know you like to talk about the somatic piece of therapy and how does burnout kind of show up in a physical state for people?
I think off the top of my head, this can look like, chronic fatigue, headaches, muscle tension, definitely impacting your sleep, maybe getting sick more. And I would bet that there's a lot more physical responses that maybe I can't think of right now, but maybe listeners have experienced in their own place of burnout.
It's the brain fog for me, the
Yeah.
just inability to really focus. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. One piece for me is when I feel compassion fatigue or I'm feeling like my empathy is like not as attuned in the way that it should be. That's a real sign that I need to like take a break.
mhm. Yeah, that's a good sign.
Yeah. Therapists need breaks too.
Absolutely. Everyone needs a break and everyone can burn out.
Hmm. Hmm. What practices from burnout have you tried and have they been effective in your own life?
I think it's been eye-opening, honestly, to just learn about the stress response cycle. So I'm interested to implement some of the action items that they had for that when the scenario shows itself in the future. Hopefully not, but when that happens. But I think the emphasis on the being present and like the mindfulness of things and not thinking too far ahead on things. I as we say in Ireland, I am someone that puts the cart before the horse, where I'm always sort of worrying about things further down the line, and just trying to like bring myself back to that. So whether it's, like taking my dog for a walk and really just sort of lingering on that, I
Mm,
try not to even listen to music or anything or just nothing to be really present in like the outside or like conversations with people. And I really liked the piece they had about, I guess I didn't realize the impact of the social connection on improving burnout. So whether or
hmm.
not it's just, your chat with your neighbor or your barista, who I chat to my barista about RuPaul's Drag Race all the time, which is like the best, but just like making sure that I'm making the time for that. I'm not only doing that when I'm in a good mood, you're sort of like forcing yourself to like, yeah, take your headphones off and actually be a bit more present in the world. I think that's something that I kind of already was doing, but I guess I can try and do it in a bit more of a thoughtful or intentional way. What practices have you tried?
Well, I'm a huge physical person. I think that is my easiest go-to. I grew up playing sports and always have some type of exercise or practice in my week. So that to me is the easiest default. And so I think after reading this book, I was like, oh, maybe this is a sign to kind of shift the time that I do that to maybe this is why gyms are so busy after work. People are kind of needing that space to move their own like stress cycle back to calm. So definitely physical. And then to your point, and actually this goes back to the vagus nerve too, right? Like the social engagement system, right? Like talking to your neighbor, like finding someone, maybe it's my partner or a friend that I can talk to that feels like a safe space and someone that I feel like really sees me and hears me is like another way to kind of engage that system.
I think there was also some learnings on the other side of how to help other people with burnout or like you were saying, you might vent to your partner without actually wanting anything actionable from them. You just need to get it out. And
Hmm.
then because I tend to sort of always try and solution things, but just being a bit more aware of if somebody is venting to me, just checking in like, so are you looking for like input or is it just you can just go nuts, go nuts saying this. So I think that that was a good takeaway for me as well.
Yeah, totally. Do you want problem solving or do you want support? Do you want to vent, or do you want to talk through? Is a great way to kind of further engage to see what that person is needing. There's a piece in this book, actually a large piece, which is connecting to your something larger, which like essentially is how do you find meaning in your life on like the bigger scale? But I'm curious to bring it down to the micro. How do you find meaning in your day to day?
I know. I think it's so hard. It's hard to find what your something larger motivation is. The book does a great way of breaking it down or not, we don't all have to be running charities for nothing and, like doing this kind of altruistic work. So I think you can find meaning in, for me, it's just really appreciating like really little moments and finding the meaning in that. I don't know. I feel like sometimes this might sound like a little bit trite, but it's like I am obsessed with just like staring at the clouds and having a moment of following the clouds in the sky, or when you're walking along and I see a stranger like, smile at my dog, that just kills me.
Mm,
And those little things are like so meaningful. Or I can hear somebody afterwards be like, "Did you see his eyes? They're so blue." And you're just like,
hmm.
so I think those things are really great. Just little smiles with people, just the genuine kind of very small interactions. Yeah, when I think about my day to day, those are the moments that kind of pop up for me. What about you?
As I think about this question, there's so many different ways to answer it. Relationships are really important. Feeling connected to the work that I'm doing is another motivator as well. But I think as we're talking, what's coming to me now is the moments in the day where I actually get to reflect on, wow, like this is what I had been working towards for 8 years, 7 years, right? Like the place I'm at now is something I was previously trying to get to a few years ago. And that feels really helpful for me to reflect on sometimes because I do think we live in a society and culture that we're like always trying to move forward and push and find the next goal. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, it's nice to bask in where I am presently. So that's like such a nice practice. I should probably try and do it every day. But the moments I do kind of reconnect to that, I'm like, wow, I've accomplished a lot in 10 years, or like, look at me here, right? Like it does feel really, really good.
I know, I love that. Yeah, we should all kind of reflect on things like a little bit more. I guess, yeah, and just as we're talking now, I think about my mornings are just so precious to me. Like I love them. I'm a slow
Mm,
start, get up early, walk the dog. I feel like I've only talked about my dog this entire episode, but come back and have coffee. And if it's have coffee outside, if it's warm enough and not winter, I like to get up early and just read for a little bit in the morning as well. And I find that being immersed in somebody else's creativity. I find a lot of meaning in just other people exploring these ideas that I could resonate with, or just some people being creative. And then, as you're saying, to acknowledge how far you've come, I like to try and remind myself that isn't it so nice that I have this privilege to have this space where I can just take 30 to 40 minutes in my morning and I'm not stressed and I get to do
mm.
this and be quiet. I get a lot out of that.
I love your morning routine. I know we've talked about this in the past and I'm not too happy with my mornings right now, so I'm like trying to soak in your energy to kind of rethink how I'm approaching my mornings.
Do
But I
it. And
think
I
it's
need to take your energy of the physical stress cycle response. Because that's been so
well,
like that's been something that's new to me. And
right.
I do notice it now if I haven't like worked out in a couple like I notice the mental difference, which is I'm learning all this for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's interesting too because in the book it talks about, because I think the physical element is the most obvious one of
Hmm.
like ways to reset. And it's definitely the one that's the most natural for me. But I like that this book also kind of brings in different perspective. Like it's not the most natural one for everyone. So maybe for some people it's they move toward more towards creativity. Maybe that's where they, if they make music, they spend some time on that or art, so it's I like that this book kind of widens that understanding because yeah, I think a lot of people know at the basis like working out is good for you, physical, it's like, oh yeah, we get that, but that's not everyone's cup of tea.
But you could also be on a treadmill and like be totally mindless and actually doing your work emails at the same time, and you're not really getting some of the uh, burnout relief that you could be getting as well. Yeah. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm. There's a chapter in this book that's called The Game is Rigged, which I was kind of surprised that it had the chapter inclusion, but it made sense for the book as the whole. And it touches on like societal expectations that help lead to burnout. And it tends to kind of focus on like women more than men. So what do you think about how burnout affects women more than men, perhaps?
And it's funny because before we started recording, I was like, oh yeah, I guess this is a book that is written for women. And it's obvious when you're reading it, but I think the first time I read it, like I talked about, I was really, you know, interested in the stress response cycle and how that's like applicable to everyone. So that was my main takeaway. But yeah, this book, it is talking about women and folks that like present as women and how women face societal pressures to be constantly nurturing and productive and selfless, which creates sort of a double burden. It's like the internal stress and the external demands. It's essentially saying that it's disproportionate in how it affects their mental and physical health. And so, yes, I agree with that. I think it's more nuanced than that. You could argue that all marginalized communities are feeling more stress, but this does talk about women in more of a vague way.
Yeah, it goes a lot into body image stuff, which I just wasn't expecting to be part of the book, but I see why they did it because these are probably symptoms that can lead to burnout that you're not even aware that you're constantly battling as like
Hmm.
a woman or like a gender fluid person who's sort of in this space, that you're kind of like constantly being hounded in such a negative way. There's a little bit about like what do they call it? The bikini industrial complex.
Industrial complex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess goes back to your like your vagus nerve baseline or the ladder that we're talking about. Maybe women are always on the third sprung, is that a word? On the third beam, without realizing it. So then when you're adding like little bits of stress, you're like even higher up. So it was kind of eye-opening
Hmm.
to see that, I guess, that we deal with a lot more stuff than we realize we deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, if your baseline is already kind of taking on all of these stressors, you're already higher up into that. Any sort of minor stressor, minor, I'm like quoting with my fingers, is going to like bring you higher into that stress.
Hmm.
One thing from this book that I wanted to touch upon was the talk of rest and how rest is not just sleep. And they define like two types of rest. So passive rest is your body being still, like sleeping, and active rest includes, I think more slow, gentle movement or creativity. And that's talking a lot about physical rest. What are some examples of other types of rest that they talk about in the book?
I think they talk about mental rest, right? Like just giving your mind a break, which I think ties into a bit of the mindfulness, pausing around decision making or, trying meditation or resets, or like I said, like going for a walk without your headphones to sort of just be in your head without your constant stream of thinking. There's the emotional rest, which is part of, I guess, of the like the depersonalization that leads to burnout. So just being free to talk to somebody that is going to validate your feelings without judging. So, like we said, like venting to your partner so you can express this without having to worry about anything and give you like a little bit of emotional relief. The social rest, I'm excellent at social rest where you just spend a lot of time on your own. But, or not just solo time, but just being mindful or choosing the people that you're spending time with that aren't draining to you. I always sort of think of myself in the middle of like introvert or extrovert, where like I can kind of enjoy both things. But I think everyone knows that there are certain social instances that are maybe going to cause them more drain than others. So just being conscious of that. And then the last two that they talk about is the creative rest and the spiritual rest, which I kind of think they go a little bit hand in hand, creatively recharging yourself, being more playful with stuff, giving yourself room to be silly is always fun, or just like have some curiosity. And then the spiritual rest, kind of as we talked about, thinking about your purpose or your higher meaning, not higher meaning, just your meaning in general of like just being driven by by things that are kind of greater than yourself. It doesn't necessarily have to mean like a strict religious matter in spirituality. It's like I think those things are quite personal to everyone in what motivates their decisions and how they kind of feel rested.
Yeah, thank you for listing those out. I'm so happy we're touching on it because I'm just imagining someone who has maybe decided to take time off of work or has reached a level of burnout that they just like need to take a full break and then not really knowing what to do with their time, right? Because I know we talked about prior to recording this idea of like coming home from work and lazing on the couch and watching TV. And sometimes that's maybe feels good and that would be considered more of like passive rest. But if someone has been working at a pace that's been high and maybe they have high standards for themselves, I think kind of then gaining a lot of time, not knowing what to do with themselves, and having people say, well, you should be like resting and taking time off. Some people don't know what that looks like, right? So I really wanted to touch on this because it's like, oh, okay, I have all this time back. I'm used to operating at 100% focus on work or whatever it is. Oh, maybe this is time for me to tap into some creativity, get out some crayons and paper and like put something down, see what that feels like. Or, hey, how do I actually feel when I hang out with these friends, right? Like that's why I wanted to touch on this because I'm just picturing someone, reading this book being like, and what do I do if I decide to take that time off? So thanks for sharing those bits.
No worries. I know for me personally, like I mean, I'm a big fan of trash telly and the couch. Like, but if I
Yeah.
if I am sort of in a sense of burnout or I'm not even really paying attention to it, getting into the habit of just listening to the television while you're kind of fooling around on your phone, if I do that for too long, like too many days in a row, or if it's every day after work for a couple of weeks or something, I kind of feel it. Like I'm like, oh, I'm not getting something out of this. Sometimes it's all I want, and I'll definitely get something out of it for 3 days. But it was nice to see these other options of like, oh, okay, so it's like some creative rest is now needed, picking that piece up, or I don't know, I tend to usually just like, okay, now I'll read a book instead of this, or do go for a walk or something else. Yeah, I hadn't thought about rest in broken down in that way.
We touched a little bit on, well, a few times on, your connection to your dog or, spending time with friends and how that feels. Do you think connection is the best means to combat burnout?
Probably one of the easiest ones, and maybe that's what people think along with, as we were saying about the physical activity. I do think so. I think there's something to be said about like how you feel after you have a really nice interaction or catch up with someone. It can feel really, really refreshing. Hopefully it doesn't feel like not a nice interaction. But I think you have to be in the right headspace for it as well. But I do think, yeah, connection to people is I think always a good way to combat burnout, or like to at least I don't know. They talk about just having hugs and like long hugs with people, or like physical contact or something. I think those things can really help bring you out of this isolated feeling if you are not being very social.
Totally. Yeah. Like speaking of the hugs, it's like, okay, this hug or this social interaction actually releases oxytocin, which lowers cortisol, which is the stress hormone, right? So it helps shift the body out of that stress state. So yeah, I think I agree. I think it is one of the best. It's a tool, but I think it's also important to highlight the other ones which we have in case that's a hard access for some people to find that connection. Yeah, I do think it is one of the best, but I'm like, there's these other ones too, right? Which I think is really cool to learn for some people.
Did you try the hug with your partner?
I have not. What is it like
It's like a 2-3 minute hug or something like that, like
oh,
a really long, like to just like
I'll
stay
I'll
there.
have to try it. I'll try it and report back.
Okay, good.
But I
Um,
guess that's like a cuddle, right? Too, like sitting on the couch
I
and
guess so.
yeah.
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 And I think the in-person stuff, I know we're on Zoom right now, but like
Hmm.
the in-person connection does have a difference. And like, I don't know what you think actually. Do you think I know both of us are a fan of a phone call, but do you think you can get connection through a phone call, or would in-person be sort of better for combating burnout?
I don't know. I think I mean, we had this same, I think, question when we did the polyvagal book,
Hmm.
but I I think, face-to-face connection, even if it's on Zoom, is helpful. I do think that there's something different about an in-person interaction because you're like, feeling that person's energy, you're noticing the micro movements that maybe you wouldn't see on Zoom. And then a phone call is great, but you're not physically seeing that person.
Hmm.
So I don't know the answer. I think if your access is like a telephone call, then great. Our second book actually was also a Tara pick this month. It had been on my radar to read, and so this was a good excuse to read it. And I actually feel like the books paired really, really well together. And so our second book is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. Why did you pick this book?
Well, I was trying to think of a fiction book that would match Burnout when I thought we would maybe talk about it. And this was the first one that came to mind when you think about rest, because, well, firstly, it's in the title, but like the whole story is about this person trying to escape the world. And I was trying to think about the protagonist as, are they in a state of burnout? And then, I mean, we can talk about this in a second, but I was like trying to, are they burnt out or are they in like this depressive state? What's the line there? And like, how does that change? Or like, what would the protagonist have done? Could some of the steps that were in the book Burnout like have helped them? But also this book was just like such a big release when it came out. I always think that like
Hmm.
everyone that worked in publishing was just like obsessed with this book. And Ottessa Moshfegh is like so beloved. I've read a couple of her other books as well. And one of the things that she's excellent at, and then I think maybe we talked about this offline, is she just writes really unlikable characters, and that's not a dig in any way. I think she's a genius writer, and I think it's such a skill to write this unlikable protagonist. Actually, like everyone is unlikable in the book. Reva's also kind of unlikable, her friend.
Hmm.
But to be able to write an unlikable character that keeps you still wanting to read. So I have this weird relationship with this book, and it was her other books that I've read as well, where it's like you finish the book, and I always find it kind of, I'm like frustrated because they didn't get nicer. And I'm like, of course not, because she told you from the first page of what kind of unlikable characters. So yeah, anyway, it's I like the challenging of a classic, uh your expectations of what a protagonist would be. I kind of like enjoy that challenge. Did you
Hmm.
enjoy the reading?
I did enjoy the re I agree that I found the protagonist really, really unlikable and like at some points like un insufferable. I do have like some empathy for her, of course, but yeah, it's hard to read when I was like wanting to shake the character, like stand up, girl, like stand up and face these things you're trying to avoid. Like that's how I felt like a lot of time in the book. But
But then
I
that's a
guess
good,
like
it's a good writer because she's got
yeah.
you, you're like so absolved in the story that you want to do that. That's I love this contrast.
Yeah, I'm like, stand up, girl. Like it was hard to like extend my compassion for her throughout the whole book. And yeah, there's bits that I feel like a lot of empathy for her. But I guess on that note, if listeners haven't read it, could you just give like a brief overview of what the book is about?
So this book is about a main protagonist who is just kind of, I guess, totally burnt out and decides to take a year off, just a year off of the world. And they have this psychiatrist who prescribes them a ridiculous medley of I guess drugs and medicine that will help sort of their aim really is to stay asleep for an entire year. And it's set in New York City in 99 2000, which I kind of thought was like an interesting time. I guess it's like the year 2000 that it's set. And she's living in the Upper West Side. So it's kind of like it does come from the vantage point of this just privileged person who has
Mhm.
decided that things are too hard and just gonna take a year off. They set up their rent to be all auto paid, all of their bills are going to be auto paid, and they just want to take a year and just sleep. And it's kind of that's essentially what the book is about.
Yeah, I'm with you on the privilege of our protagonist who I recently called Esther because we just read The Bell Jar. So I was like, oh, that's an interesting sort of, I don't know, mind trick that I've named this person Esther, even though she's, unnamed.
I think that's maybe led me to picking this book as well, is because we had just so recently read The Bell Jar. It has very similar, it's just a similar tone, both being set in New
Hmm.
York as well. It's similar vibes for sure.
Hmm. What are some of your main takeaways from this book?
Like I talked about, I guess the writing, in a literary term, I find it really interesting the contrast of a difficult character. But then I guess the whole idea of taking a year off, like, is that something that's possible or that somebody could do? So I think the way that the author unraveled the trauma that the character's actually dealing with that are
Hmm.
sort of leading into those decisions, it's revealed quite slowly as you're because sometimes a chapter not a lot will happen, she'll have
Yeah.
just gone to the bodega and come back
Yeah.
again, and then it sort of reveals like actually her parents both are have passed away and the instances that have led to that, and
Hmm.
this job that she works that she doesn't love, and this person that she's sometimes with that's maybe not a healthy relationship at all. And you sort of start to see, so I guess just from us as part of this podcast, me reading a little bit more about like mental health and psychology a little bit, I thought it was interesting to see how a character is developed and yeah, how their backstory is presented into leading into what this is a pretty insane idea to just medicate
Hmm.
yourself and sleep for an entire year. And then also keeping in mind, wherever you go, there you are. Like it won't solve, just knowing that it's all of her decisions were sort of poor decisions. And it was kind of interesting to read along with them, just being like, this isn't going to actually fix any of your problems. But
Right, right. The like self-isolation and essentially like sedation isn't going to heal those deeper emotional wounds.
no, no, not at all. What do you think this book says about like the limits of self-care? And I guess actually, do you think the protagonist is trying to care for themselves at all?
I don't know. It's hard to know the motivation. I think it's framed as taking a year of rest, but it's approached in such a self-destructive way that it
Mhm.
doesn't actually feel like the intention is to take care of oneself.
It's very much an escapist mentality, isn't it? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's
it's
running away.
avoidance.
Yeah,
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 it's avoidance, right?
yeah.
Like she's moving into avoidance, whereas the book Burnout is really encouraging like active, embodied healing, whereas like the protagonist is just pursuing escape, and
Mhm.
that like further isolates her. So yeah, it's hard. I don't know, but I would say no.
And I guess that's the biggest way that it sort of contrasts, like that burnout is such actionable advice, and then
Right.
this book, My Year of Rest and Relaxation, is just avoiding sort of doing any of that piece.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the stress cycle, like, how does that show up for the narrator?
Well, she never completes the stress cycle. Instead of like metabolizing the stress, she essentially sedates herself through pills and sleep. And then she's essentially stuck in the emotional numbness. And for her, like a lot of unresolved trauma.
I thought it was kind of interesting that the way they introduced the backstory of some of her parents, did she learn the stress responses that she has from her parents, do you think?
I think so. I think so, right? Both of her parents seemed pretty detached emotionally and also repressed. And so I mean, she's pretty detached emotionally and repressed as well, right? Like she does have one connection that she resists the entire book. And this person keeps kind of like showing up for her, and she just won't actually meet her or let her in whatsoever. And so she like avoids all vulnerability, suppresses her pain through drugs and sleep. And that's like essentially kind of what she saw her mom do.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of sad. It was like talking about how her mom like really isolated herself, I guess was kind of relaxing in quotation marks with alcohol and drugs to sort of be in this different state. And yeah, it was sort of interesting to see it because you think you're like, how could somebody come up with this idea of like you're going to sleep for a year? And then you see these little glimpses of how the character grew up, and you're like, oh, it's like the influence from the parents. Because it made me start to think about like learned stress responses as well in like
Totally.
within my family.
Totally. And also it brings up such a discussion of class and privilege,
Hmm.
right? Like who can take a year off to just down pain meds and sleep, and like it really for me brought up like such an interesting exploration of who actually has access to that, and if they had been born into a different set of privileges or marginalization, like how would their stress response have adapted to that?
And going back to like that chapter in Burnout, the game is rigged. There was
Hmm.
glimpses of because this is set in 2000, which was not a kind time to women. But
Mm.
there's glimpses of she acknowledges that I'm not eating, so I'm being skinnier, and Riva, her friend, is complimenting that, or because she's just this. I think she's blonde. Now I don't remember, but she's just
I think
this
so.
like blonde, skinny girl that is able to go to the bodega looking like absolute trash, and people don't question her or still kind of nod at her, and it's like this, she's in this space where she can do things that other people wouldn't be able to do because of that privilege that she has. So it was yeah, there was like the self-awareness was sort of interesting, I guess.
Totally. She knew she had that pretty privilege. Thin, beautiful white woman. And she knew it, like she did have a lot of that understanding of herself, how she moves around in the world and how she's perceived.
Yeah, and a bit of a conflict too, I guess, with she's like a wealthy person, but that
Hmm.
wealth has come from her parents no longer being there. So I guess there's like a little bit of a conflict of like, what really is the wealth? It doesn't like there's a point in the book where she gets rid of everything that she ever owned because her year of rest definitely just wants to be on a mattress in a room where she's like actually locked into the space. So it was kind of an interesting thinking about that piece as well, but she never goes far enough to like there's a maybe am I spoiling the book now, but it's kind of old. Does that matter? But
I think it's
there's a
okay.
point where there's like an artist is doing like this project on her and he wants her to burn her identification and she doesn't do it. And it's I thought that was interesting because it's like, oh, you're going far enough that you're getting rid of all your belongings and everything that's valuable, but you want to go back to it at some point because you're never
Hmm.
actually removing this identity because you want to, I think she even mentions like, oh, I want to be able to go back to my bank account or something. Like
Yeah,
so have you ever felt like the narrator? I feel like you're far more likable, but I mean, have you ever
I
felt
hope
so
so.
have you ever felt so burnt out that you just wanted to disappear for a little bit?
I don't think that I've felt that extreme of needing a break. So no, I would say no. Her depletion is quite extreme, but I have definitely felt the urge to check out and escape, definitely, but definitely don't have the means to sedate and isolate myself for a full year, nor would I want to. If I had the option to like take a year off, it would be spending time in nature. Like, I don't think we had talked about that with the last book too, but how that is also such a supportive rest connection to nature. I don't know. I think I've never thought about it, but it depends it would depend on my means. If I had a year off, if I had no money, I would go, sit in a cabin in the woods or near the beach or something. But yeah, it sounds appealing if it feels nourishing, but nothing about the way she approached it feels nourishing to me.
Hmm. No, I know. I don't know why, but like your Instagram suggestions. I've been fed some people now that are fire. lookouts. So they live
Mm.
in these very remote areas on the top of a mountain that they have to like helicopter in supplies. Or part of me thinks, I'm like, oh wow, like that would be like a really interesting thing to do for a few months, or I think they only do it like seasonally, like 6 months or something. But
Hmm.
that's a real like running away from things where you're actually isolated in these spaces. But then I also think that's kind of scary too. But I don't think I'd have the nerve to do anything. I think I'd get too I don't think it would be good for me. I'd be too in my head.
Yeah, so what would you choose then for your if you were to take a year off of rest and relaxation?
I just think I'm too aware that there'd be stuff to consider that you wouldn't be fully rested or relaxing. So I don't know. I just think, I don't know, it's hard. It's like, a year to do whatever you want. I'm like, I always do whatever I want. Like, so I guess a year of fewer responsibilities, removing some of those worries, but that's impossible. So I think you have to, I'm too rooted in the practical, I think, to be like that. But I guess wistfully, you want to live by
Mm.
an ocean somewhere and like
Hmm.
become this amazing painter, or like, I don't know, go live in New Mexico and pretend I'm George O'Keeffe, that would be the
Hmm.
that would be the dream.
Mm. Hmm. You mentioned this book taking place in like 2000, 2001. What are your thoughts on how the author used 9/11 as a tension build throughout the book?
I thought it was really effective because I think this book came out in maybe like 2016, 17, probably actually around the same time as
Oh
Burnout came
yeah,
out, which is
actually,
ironic.
interesting.
It's not ironic, it's a coincidence, but so you start reading the book knowing, and you're like, it's a very New York City book. It's very
Hmm.
obviously in the year 2000. She's constantly talking about the VHSs that she's watching.
Hmm.
I also am a big Whoopi Goldberg fan and love the movie Jumping Jack Flash, so I really liked that inclusion because it's such a classic. But so there's like those little glimpses, and even when she mentions that person that she's seeing works in the towers, or then her friend is
Yeah,
about to get I was going to say sent to the towers, but like a
a
promotion
promotion.
to a job that is in the towers. So you're
Hmm.
kind of like wincing. I think the book, you're kind of wincing the whole time you're reading it. And
Yeah,
I think it was effective in how subtle it was, that it wasn't dun dun dun, this big thing that we all know is awful is going to happen. It was just sort of in the background of this, again, I think the privilege of this woman's world being, she's just able to escape all of this, not knowing this big thing is going to happen. And yeah, I just thought it was really good to sort of build tension without being over the top, or without this being a book about New York at that time. Like it remains a,
yeah,
a book about somebody trying to escape.
yeah, I agree.
There was a line that I liked from the book that said, it was kind of when it comes toward the end, as the author, or the author, as the narrator is emerging from the year of rest and relaxation, where she acknowledges there's stability in living in the past. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something safe around living in the past because it feels fixed and familiar, right? Like it's a familiar story for her, but it also prevents any growth, right? So it's like, oh yeah, I know that I know this story. I know how it turns out. I know how to like live in this, but she's experienced a lot of grief and trauma and heartache. And so I'm imagining like moving forward, there's potentially fear. So living in the past is a lot safer for her, even if it's not healthy.
Hmm. I always think that there's risk of getting stuck within nostalgia as well. Like
Hmm.
I think it's nice to be nostalgic for the past. Not that this protagonist is. I think the past is like a difficult thing, but yeah, you can really get stuck in that, which I don't always think is a good place to be in.
Totally. I guess without sharing the ending, do you see the ending as tragic or optimistic or anything else?
It's funny because the I enjoyed the book a lot more reading it this time around.
Mm,
I always find that so interesting when you revisit books at a different time in your life and how you just totally interpret them in a different way. I guess that's the beauty of good writing. I think when I read it when it had came out, I would have seen it as a tragic ending and kind of challenging because it's a bit abrupt, right? It's not maybe the most satisfying ending as a reader, but now I sort of view it in a more of an optimistic lens. There's something about the way, I mean, without giving anything away, but the protagonist at some point goes to a gallery and gets really fixated on a work of art and leans forward and touches it, you know? So
mhm.
I found those sort of glimpses to be optimistic with she was actually coming back to be present and again the privilege touch this thing that you're not allowed to touch. But I really liked that visual and that idea of this person coming out of this hazy state to really value simple beauty and simple beauty in the present. So yeah, my opinion definitely it changed in my
Mm,
second reading. What was your
mhm.
first reading opinion? Do you think it was tragic or an optimistic ending?
Um, both.
Mhm.
Like I do feel like it was quite ambiguous, but I personally felt more of the glimmer of hope. Yeah, to your point, there's a kind of a reemerging of her that I felt, oh, okay, maybe there's movement forward now. But yeah, I do think it's quite ambiguous and can be interpreted both ways, always.
I've had a few people say to me, "Oh, I wish I would have loved that book when I was in my 20s." Do you think
Mm,
20-year-old Amanda would have enjoyed it? Or what do you think she would have gotten from it?
I think I was less cynical in my early 20s.
I was way,
Um,
way more cynical. It's so funny.
I don't, I think there's parts I would have related to, especially the like toxic situationship that she was in, but I don't think I would have felt as connected to her response. Whereas like an older woman, I feel like I understand why and how she went there. Whereas like in my young 20s, I don't think I would have felt connected to that kind of response.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts?
I don't know. I mean, other than maybe much more cynical, I think I would have connected with the want to escape and like just the almost teenage idea of like, yeah, the world is so unfair.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would have resonated with me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of bratty attitude. Not to, is that that's actually not how the youngins use the term brat now, though. It's just like, but like that almost adolescent response, that's kind of the reading. So maybe I would have connected with that a little bit more than now. Like you, I see the reasoning that led her there, or I try and think about the like using that again to see like, how are your parents influential into the decisions you're making? I guess if I read that when I was in my 20s, I'd probably be like, yeah, man, I'd love a year to do that. Like amazing.
Mm-hmm. Like, yes, is this a brat girl summer? Was she having her brat girl
Oh my
summer?
God, completely different
What do
meanings.
you think, listeners?
Thanks for listening to Books from Your Therapist. If you're interested in the books we talked about, we'll include links in our show notes. If you'd like to reach out to us with your own recommendations or are a mental health practitioner interested in coming on to share, you can email us at booksfromyourtherapist@gmail.com.
Happy completing your stress response cycle.
Happy resting.